Nearly 5 years after a stranger threw sulfuric acid in her face, Nafia Ikram is finally hearing something she never thought she would, an arrest made in the case. The 26-year-old now knows who prosecutors say did it, but she still doesn't know why she was targeted.
She was steps from her front door. Steps. The kind of moment you don't even think twice about. You're home. The day is done. You made it. And that is exactly when a masked stranger walked out of the dark and threw a cup of sulfuric acid directly into her face. Not because of a long, messy relationship, not because of a painful breakup after years together. 2 dates. That is the entire romantic history between this woman and the man who planned this attack. 2 outings. That is all it took for one man to decide that a woman's face needed to be destroyed. Make it make sense. She was not his girlfriend. She was not his ex. She barely knew this man existed, and yet in his mind, her simply not wanting him back was enough reason to plan, to recruit, and to carry out one of the most violent attacks you will ever hear about. A young woman, her own driveway, a cup full of sulfuric acid, and a masked stranger, sent by a man who thought he owned her attention. This is the story of Nafia Ikram. And this is what obsession looks like when nobody stops it in time. You are watching Unheard Cries TV, a channel dedicated to the stories of domestic violence and crimes committed by people against those they claim to love or want. No sugarcoating, no excuses, just the truth. Nafia Ikram was a college student living in Elmont on Long Island, New York. By every account, she was doing everything right. She was working, she was studying, she was building a future for herself. Step by step, the way you are supposed to. And she was the kind of person who, even after everything that was about to happen to her, would still find a way to say that staying true to who she was is what carried her through it all. That kind of strength is not common, let me tell you something. That kind of strength is rare. She was 21 years old when her path crossed with a man named Shaquille Coe. Coe was from Brooklyn, and by the time this story becomes a story, he was 31 years old. Prosecutors would describe him as a former Hofstra University student, someone who, on the surface, probably seemed like a reasonable prospect. Educated. Moving in the same general world she was moving in. They went on 2 dates. That is the full romantic history between these 2 people. 2 outings, and Nafia saw red flags. She said it herself, and she saw them, she registered them, and she made a decision. She pulled back. She was not interested. She moved on the way any person with sense would after 2 dates that made them uncomfortable. But Shaquille Coe did not move on. And that is where this whole thing takes its first dark turn. Anyways, let me tell you about what came next. Because it matters. It matters because it shows you exactly who this man was before a single drop of acid ever touched the air. When Nafia stepped back, Coe did not respect it. He did not take the hint and redirect himself somewhere else. Instead, he got obsessive, he got jealous. Prosecutors would later describe his behavior in the period leading up to the attack as jealous and possessive. And those are not exaggerations. Those are their words. Here is what he allegedly did. He created a fake social media account, a whole fake profile, and used that account to reach out to Nafia, trying to get her to admit that she had cheated on him. On him. A man she went on 2 dates with. He tried to manufacture a betrayal that did not exist from a relationship that did not exist, so that he could justify the rage he was already carrying around inside himself. Like how did we even get here? This was not a man processing rejection in a healthy way. This was a man who had already decided that Nafia owed him something, that her attention, her time.
Do you have a message for Nafia's family? Say it again.
Her presence, all of it belonged to him by right. And the moment she made clear that none of that was his, something in him did not just break. It calculated. Because what Shaquille Coe did next was not impulsive. It was not a snap decision made in a moment of emotion. What came next required planning. It required a phone call. It required a conversation with someone willing to carry it out. Enter Terrell Campbell. Terrell Campbell was 29 years old, also from Brooklyn, and he was Shaquille Coe's friend, going all the way back to high school. The kind of friendship where you answer the phone no matter what time it rings. The kind of loyalty that in this case, bait became a weapon. Prosecutors say that on the day of the attack, these two men were not just in the same city by coincidence, they were in communication. They were coordinating. Cell phone records and video footage would later place both of them in direct connection with what went down in that driveway. And the prosecution's position was very clear. Coe was not just present somewhere nearby. He was the one who put everything in motion. He was, in their words, the motivator. Now moving on to who Terrell Campbell actually was outside of this moment. Because this part is important. Campbell considered himself an aspiring rapper. He was working on his music, building his craft, and normally that detail would mean nothing at all. But in this case, it means everything. Because after the attack, after he allegedly walked up to a young woman standing alone in the dark, threw sulfuric acid in her face, and ran back to a waiting car, this man went into a recording booth and he made a song in which he referenced throwing acid like a hitman assassin. So what? So now sit with what that actually means. He did not just allegedly commit this crime. He turned it into a lyric. He took a woman's permanent disfigurement and made it something he was proud enough to put on record. That is deeply disturbing. There is no softer way to say it. But the song was not the only thing that would eventually connect him to this crime. There were also searches made from his devices asking one very specific question: how to remove sulfuric acid from car fabric. Oh, so now we are piecing this together, because if you have never had sulfuric acid anywhere near you or your vehicle, that is not a search you ever run. That search tells investigators that something got onto the car, that the acid did not stay entirely on its target, and that after everything was over, somebody was very actively trying to clean up. What investigators eventually built was a picture of two men who had thought this through. Coe, according to prosecutors, was behind the wheel of a red Nissan Altima on the night of the attack. Campbell was the one who got out, and Nafia Ikram was the one standing in her own driveway, just a few feet from her front door, completely unaware of what was coming for her. She did not know Terrell Campbell. When she later heard his name for the first time, she said she had never heard it in her life. That is the most chilling part of this entire story. The man who physically attacked her, who walked up to her face in the dark, was a complete stranger. She had done nothing to him. She did not even know he existed. He was simply the instrument of someone else's anger. And Shaquille Coe, he had kept himself so far removed from the physical act of the attack that for years, he was able to deny any involvement. He gave police nothing when they first came to him. He maintained his innocence publicly. He denied everything all the way up until the day he was standing in a courtroom. Let me tell you something, that kind of calculated distance is not innocence. That is someone who thought about consequences before the act. Someone who designed his role to be invisible. But here is the thing about invisible. Nothing stays invisible forever. Now let us go back to that night. Because as careful as these two men thought they were being, there are some things you cannot plan for. You cannot plan for a victim who survives. You cannot plan for a community that refuses to forget. And you cannot plan for the fact that time, while it can feel like it is protecting you, is also working quietly against you. It was March 2021. Nafia Ikram was coming home from work. That detail alone should tell you everything about the kind of night this was supposed to be. Ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of evening where you clock out, make your way home, and think about what you are going to eat or watch before you fall asleep. Nothing about that night was supposed to be a story. It was just supposed to be a regular night. She pulled up. She got out. She was steps from her front door, and then a red Nissan Altima that had no business being on that block rolled up, and a man got out. He was wearing a mask. Not something thrown together at the last minute. A mask. That detail alone tells you everything you need to know about premeditation. Nobody puts on a mask for something they decided to do 5 minutes ago. That mask was chosen. It was part of the plan from the beginning. And in his hand was a cup. Nafia did not have time to run. She did not have time to understand what was happening. The man walked directly up to her, threw the contents of that cup into her face, and ran back to the car. The car pulled off, and Nafia Ikram was left standing in her own driveway, sulfuric acid burning through her skin. Let me be very clear about what sulfuric acid actually does to the human body, because the phrase acid attack can start to feel abstract until you understand the reality of it. Sulfuric acid does not simply burn on contact and stop. It reacts. It eats through layers of tissue. It keeps burning even after the initial exposure because of the chemical reaction it triggers with the moisture in your skin. Survivors describe the pain as unlike anything else in human experience. And the damage, the scarring, the tissue loss, the destruction of features is often permanent. There is no reversing it. There is only surviving it and then rebuilding whatever you can from what remains. Nafia Ikram lost the sight in one eye that night. She went on to endure countless reconstructive and life-saving surgeries. Not one or two, countless. The kind of medical journey that takes years, that restructures your entire life around appointments, recoveries, and procedures, that forces you to grieve a version of yourself while still trying to hold on to who you are underneath all of it. And she did not even know why. That is the part that does not get said enough. In the immediate aftermath of this attack, Nafia had no name. She had no face to put to what had happened to her, because the man who physically attacked her wore a mask. She had no motive she could point to, no explanation that made any sense of it. She was just a young woman lying in a hospital bed trying to survive something she did not understand. That kind of not knowing is its own kind of torment. And Shakil Coe, if prosecutors are to be believed, was out here in the world, free, going about his life, and allegedly in the days that followed, sending anonymous text messages to the woman he had just had attacked, taunting her. Think about the nerve of that. Think about what kind of person looks at someone in that condition and decides to poke at the wound, to remind her, without ever saying his name directly, that he was still there, that he was still watching. I said what I said. That is a level of cruelty that most people cannot even imagine. Police came to Coe early. They interviewed him. He was in the circle of people they looked at, and he denied everything only, calmly and completely. And without enough evidence at that point to move forward, investigators had to let it go and keep working. He walked out of that early contact with law enforcement and went right back to his life. Years passed, but the case did not close. And that is where this story shifts. Because what happened over the next 5 years is its own chapter entirely. Here is where this story shifts. Because what happened over the next 5 years is not just a footnote. It is its own chapter. And it is the kind of chapter that reminds you that time does not always protect the guilty. Sometimes it just delays the reckoning. The investigators working this case did not file it away and move on. Nafia's attack stayed open. It stayed active. And in a world where cold cases get colder with every day that passes without a break, the fact that this one eventually cracked open the way it did says something. It says something about the persistence of the people working it. And it says something about the eventual collapse of the wall these two men had built around themselves. Let me tell you something. When walls built on lies have a shelf life, and these two had been leaning on theirs for a long time, tips started coming in from the community. And that matters more than people realize. When a community holds on to a case, when people who know something eventually find the courage to say something, it changes the whole direction of an investigation. The district attorney would later make a point of acknowledging that community cooperation was central to breaking this open. Somebody knew something. And eventually somebody said something. But tips alone were never going to be enough to close this. What investigators also needed was the kind of evidence that does not lie, does not forget, and does not change its story under pressure. They needed data. Tech companies were brought in. Phone records, digital footprints, the kind of electronic trail that people forget they are leaving every single time they make a call, send a message, or run a search on their device. And it was inside that digital trail that the case started to come together in a way that tips alone could never have built. Oh, so now we are getting somewhere. Because this is exactly where Terrell Campbell's world started closing in on him. Investigators found the searches, the ones asking how to remove sulfuric acid from car fabric. And you have to understand what that search represents in the middle of a criminal investigation. That is not a search a random person ever runs. That is a search made by someone who had sulfuric acid in their car and needed to deal with the evidence of it. That single search placed the substance inside a vehicle connected to Campbell, and it placed it there after the attack had already happened. And then there was the song. The rap recording in which Campbell, the aspiring artist, had referenced throwing acid like a hitman assassin. Prosecutors pointed to it. Investigators noted it. It was the kind of evidence that is almost too direct to believe, but there it was, sitting on record. A man who allegedly carried out an acid attack on a stranger, then went into a studio and rapped it in a lyric like it was something to be proud of. Period. Whether that was arrogance or carelessness or some version of both, it did not matter. It existed, and it would be used. Moving on to how the first arrest finally happened. Nearly 5 years after the attack, Terrell Campbell was taken into custody. He was charged with assault and possession of a noxious substance, among other counts. He pleaded not guilty. And his father, when approached by reporters outside the courthouse and asked if he had anything to say about his son being charged with throwing acid into a young woman's face, gave them the middle finger and walked away. That was the response. Not grief, not shock, not even a quiet no comment. A middle finger. So what? So the whole family has nothing to say. Okay, noted. But here's the thing. When the family's reaction to accountability looks like that, it tells you something about the environment that shaped the person standing in that courtroom. It does not excuse anything. It does not explain anything away, but it tells you something. Now, Nafia's reaction to Campbell's arrest was not the relief you might expect, and the reason why is important. When investigators came to her and told her who they had arrested, she said she did not recognize his name at all. He was a complete stranger. She'd never
arrest in this case. Tonight, we are hearing from the victim and learning more about the suspect. Fox 5's Jada Goldberg has more from Elmont.
When they made the arrest and they said the name, I've never heard that name in my life.
Nearly 5
never heard of him in her life. And that meant that the man who physically attacked her, the one who walked up to her face in the dark, was only a piece of the puzzle, not the reason behind it. There was still the question of why. There was still the question of who sent him. And that answer, when it finally came, hit differently. Because investigators kept pulling the thread. Cell phone records showing communication between Campbell and Coe on the very day of the attack. Video footage placing them near each other and near the scene. A pattern of behavior from Coe, both before and after the attack, that prosecutors argued told the complete story of a man who had orchestrated every single part of this from the beginning. The fake social media account, the trap he tried to set before the attack to manufacture a reason to be furious with her, the alleged anonymous taunting texts he sent while she was in a hospital bed, burned and fighting to recover. All of it laid out together told one story. The story of a man who had never once let go of his obsession with a woman who went on 2 dates with him and walked away. Like, how did we get here? How does someone move from she is not into me to building something like this? Not just building it, seeing it through, following it up, taunting the aftermath. The level of entitlement packed into all of that is staggering. And then Shaquille Coe was arrested. Nafia was in that courtroom when he was brought in. She saw him, and she said she started crying. Not because she was broken, but because after 5 years of waiting, after surviving surgeries and recoveries and the kind of grief that comes with permanently losing a version of your face and your vision, she finally had the name she had been carrying the weight of without knowing. She said it herself. But at least finally I have the answers to of like who is behind it. And right now it's like anger, sadness, confusion. 3 things at once, not one clean emotion, not a tidy resolution. The complicated, layered, very human response of someone who has spent 5 years carrying a weight that just got a name attached to it. Coe, for his part, stood in that courtroom and shook his head. He said, "I'm innocent." He said it clearly, on record, while prosecutors detailed what they called his jealous and possessive behavior in the lead up to the attack. While they described the fake account, while they laid out the full timeline of everything investigators had built over 5 years. He sat there, shook his head, and said no. and Nafia sat feet away from him and watched every second of it. Prosecutors also revealed something else during this process. That Ko had allegedly told people at some point that he was going to take karma into his own hands. Let that land for a second. In his own framing, in his own words passed through his own circles, he had already decided that Nafia deserved something for not choosing him, that her rejection was an offense requiring a response, that he was owed enough to go collect on it himself. Girl, the audacity of that framing alone. And Nafia's response to all of it? She did not hold back. She said, the fact that he thinks that he had the right to do that in itself and then create a whole fake scenario and all of that to make me deceptive and think that he's protective and I should stay with him because he's so protective of me, like that in itself. You're delusional and you're diabolical. Every single word of that is correct. Because look at what she is pointing to. The possibility that after the attack, Ko had also tried to position himself as someone concerned about her, someone looking out for her, someone she should keep close, while allegedly knowing full well what he had caused. That layer of manipulation stacked on top of the violence is its own category of terrible. But hey, let us talk about what the legal process actually looked like for both men, because the charges carried real weight. Terrell Campbell, the man who physically carried out the attack, was charged with first-degree assault and possession of a noxious substance, among other counts. He pleaded not guilty and was held without bail. His attorney declined to comment publicly. And if convicted, Campbell was looking at up to 25 years in prison. 25 years. For a man who, according to prosecutors, got out of a car, walked up to a complete stranger, and threw acid in her face because his high school friend made a phone call and he answered it. That is the decision now potentially costing him a quarter of a century of his life. Anyways, Ko's charges carried the same weight and then some. He was indicted by a grand jury and charged with first-degree assault, weapons possession, and possession of noxious materials. Like Campbell, he was ordered held without bail. And like Campbell, he stood in that courtroom and said he was not guilty, steady, direct, while Nafia sat just feet away, while prosecutors laid out cell phone records, video footage, and a full timeline of behavior. They argued, pointed squarely at him as the person who set all of this in motion. His defense attorney noted the presumption of innocence, which is a legal right that every person charged with a crime is entitled to. That is the system, and the system will do what the system does. But what the system also has is evidence, and the district attorney made clear that the evidence connecting these two men, the digital records, the phone communications, the footage, the searches, the song, the full timeline, was what drove both arrests and both indictments. And then the district attorney said something that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. She said more arrests could still be coming, which means that as of the time these charges were filed, investigators were not necessarily done. There may have been others involved in the planning or execution of this attack who had not yet been held accountable. That door was still open. Come to think of it, that detail should make anyone connected to this case extremely uncomfortable. Because of the investigation had already stretched 5 years and was still producing results. The idea that it was finished just because 2 men were in handcuffs was clearly not how the district attorney saw it. Moving on, because one of the most telling moments in this entire legal process did not come from either defendant. It did not come from a lawyer, a judge, or a piece of evidence. It came from Nafia herself, sitting in that courtroom, watching the man prosecutors said had sent a stranger to destroy her face, and shaking his head and calling himself innocent. She had waited 5 years for that moment. 5 years of surgeries, 5 years of grief, 5 years of carrying the weight of something she did not understand, caused by a rage she never saw coming. And she sat there, and she watched it all unfold. I said what I said. That kind of endurance is not small. That is not something you just move through. You carry it. And the fact that she showed up to that courtroom and faced him directly says everything about who Nafia Ikram is. Now let us pull back for a second, because this case, when you sit with it long enough, forces you to reckon with an uncomfortable truth about how violence against women very often begins long before the actual act of violence ever happens. It does not start with a weapon. It does not start with a plan. It starts with a man who cannot hear no. It starts with obsession, dressed up as affection, with jealousy, dressed up as care, with control that disguises itself as protection. And by the time the mask comes off, literally in this case, it is already too late for the person standing in that driveway. Shaquille Coe, according to prosecutors, did not just snap one day and do something terrible on impulse. He built toward it, step by step. He created a fake account to surveil a woman who had walked away from him after 2 dates. He allegedly tried to manufacture a betrayal that never happened, so he could justify the anger he was already carrying. He allegedly reached out to taunt her while she was in a hospital bed recovering from what he allegedly caused. And if prosecutors are right, he tried to position himself as someone on her side. Even after all of that, every single one of those steps is a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice made by a person who had decided that this woman's right to say no was an offense he was entitled to punish. And let me not let Terrell Campbell disappear into the background of this story either, because nobody forced him into that car, nobody made him put on that mask, nobody on that made him pick up that cup. Whatever loyalty or obligation existed between him and Co, he still chose to be the person who walked up to Nafia in the dark and threw it. He chose it. And then he chose to record a song about it. Those are his choices. And those are his consequences to carry. But here's what stays with me most about this entire story. Nafia Ikram lost the sight in one eye. She endured countless surgeries. She will carry the physical marks of that night for the rest of her life. And after all of that, after everything those 2 men put her through, she still found a way to say this. She said, "I've realized that just being a good person and being true to who I am, no matter what, is where Terrell lost and where his downfall was." Read that slowly. She is not talking about a verdict. She is not waiting on a courtroom to tell her she won something. She is saying that her character, who she is at her core, is what outlasted everything they tried to do to her. They came for her face, they came for her sight, they came for her peace, and she is still here, still herself, still standing. That is not a small thing, that is remarkable. So what does this case actually leave us with? It leaves us with the reminder that rejection is not a crime, that saying no is not an act of aggression. A woman who goes on 2 dates and decides she is not interested has done absolutely nothing wrong. And no amount of entitlement, jealousy, or obsession changes that. No man is owed a woman's time, her attention, her presence, or her affection. And the moment someone decides that a woman's no is something they have the right to override, by any means, through any plan, using any person they can recruit, that is the moment they have crossed a line that no loyalty, no friendship, and no amount of calculated distance can protect them from forever. Anyways, justice in a courtroom is real, but it has limits, and Nafia, to her credit, seems to already understand that. She is not waiting for a gavel to confirm that she survived. She already knows she did, and she is still talking. That matters. Not just for her, but for every person watching this who has ever been told that their no did not count, that their discomfort did not matter, that someone else's fixation on them was somehow their responsibility to manage. Let me tell you something, these situations are not always loud at first. They do not always announce themselves with screaming or threats or obvious danger signs that are easy to clock from a distance. Sometimes they look like 2 dates and a few red flags that a woman noticed and acted on correctly. Sometimes, even when you do everything right, someone else's refusal to accept your decision becomes the most dangerous thing in your world. Pay attention to the red flags. Trust what you feel, and know that your no is complete all by itself. It does not need an explanation. It does not need to be softened or justified or delivered in the right tone at the right moment. It just needs to be respected. Nafia Ikram respected herself. She saw the flags, she made her decision, and she walked away. And even after everything they put her through trying to punish her for it, she is still here, still herself, still standing. If this story stayed with you, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. This is Drifting Truth TV, where we cover the stories that live at the intersection of love, obsession, and the violence that follows when someone refuses to let go. If you are new here, subscribe. If you have been here, you already know what we do. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe for new stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and we will see you in the next one.